Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode 3 of the most in-depth guide to poly repairs anywhere on the internet. If you haven't watched the previous 2 episodes before this one, I would highly recommend you go back and watch them first. It's just going to give you a little more context in what we're talking about today. In today's episode, we're actually going to start a repair. We're going to be using sanding resin and looking at how we use sanding resin in the initial steps of repairing a surfboard. We're also going to be talking about air bubbles. What are air bubbles? How do we get air bubbles in our repairs, and how do we avoid getting them in our repairs? They're not something that we want to deal with if we can help it. Don't forget too, guys, throughout the release of this series, we are running a raffle so you can win yourself some stuff from Shapers Collective. There'll be more on that later on in this video, so stay tuned for that. And all the important information you need will be in the pinned comment of this video or any other video within this series. As always, guys, if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will definitely get back to you and answer those questions as best I can. I'm actually on holiday at the moment. I'm back home on Kangaroo Island in South Australia, so I've been a little slow replying to comments and Instagram messages, but I leave in a couple of days. I'll be back home, back to regular schedule, so I will be able to answer your comments and questions and messages a little more easily than I have been able to the last few weeks. I hope you're all well, guys. I hope this video is useful for you. I hope the previous 2 videos of this series have been useful to you, and that's about it from me. So let's get on with it, and I will see you in the next video. Choo-hoo!
So it's day 3, yeah?
Now, of course, we know where the damage is on this board. We have that little crack there, and we have our little hole in the nose. I do quite often get photos sent to me by people. They send me a photo of the damage like this, and they say, how do I go about fixing this? What's the first step? The first step to fixing a board is always going to be sanding. It doesn't matter if it's a huge D-lam, if it's a tiny little ding, if it's a chip in the paint, whatever type of damage you have to your board, the first step is sanding. And you won't really know your proper action plan until you get that sanding out of the way. I can make an action plan for this ding here, but as soon as I start sanding it, maybe it rips off a bunch of fiberglass down to the foam, and now my action plan isn't what I initially thought it was. Same with this ding here. I can come up with an action plan to fill that and glass that, but maybe as soon as I sand it, all this hole opens up, and now we've got a massive hole down to the foam. We've got to reshape the tail, replace the foam, all the rest. So until we get that first sand out of the way, we really can't accurately make our plan to go ahead. So if you're going to be sending photos of your board asking how do I fix this, it can often be a good idea to sand the area first.
I'd like to learn how to sand.
Yeah, you kind of got to learn how to surf first though, huh?
Hey, I'm pretty good.
Yeah, I can tell you're lame by the way you wear your shorts.
Then send me a photo, and then we can work on an action plan, because then we know what we're actually working with. So with all that said, we're going to start by pulling off the leash string and storing that somewhere safe, and then we're going to sand our 2 dinged areas and work out where we're going to go from there. Now, all of this initial sanding is going to be with 120 grit. If you ever see me sanding in preparation to put resin down on something, it's always going to be 120 grit. I won't pour resin over anything finer than 120. 80 grit is a little harsh. I might use it on old boards, like big old mouths that were glass like boats, but generally speaking, all of my prep work is done with 120. Okay, so we're going to have a chat about something called air bubbles, which I'm sure you've all heard of. But before we have that chat, I am going to point out that if you've ever seen one of my videos before, you will have heard me talking about not filling dings in boards with resin.
God, okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm. Everybody calm down! No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
But filling them with foam and then fiberglassing over the foam. I have a couple of examples here. So this Machado has lost both of its fin boxes, so there were giant holes there where the fin boxes were, and this is an expanding foam that I have poured in. So I haven't filled these holes with resin, I filled them with foam. I'll give you 10 points if you can tell me what type of material this board is made out of. You can pause the video here and leave that comment down below and see if you get it right. We also have this Flanagan here, so this was the same story. We've lost our futures box on our right hand rail, so there was a giant hole there, and that hole has been filled with foam, not filled up with resin. Now you'll note that those two boards, the thing that their dings had in common is they were giant holes in the board, and there was foam missing from those holes. Moving forward with our Griffin here, you'll notice there's no foam missing, there's only fiberglass and resin missing. So we don't need to replace foam with this ding, we just need to replace fiberglass and resin. The same goes for this ding here. Our damage is a split in the fiberglass, but there is no foam missing. The fiberglass is still adhered to the foam quite strongly, so it's not a delamination. We don't need to cut it out. It is also a very small ding. Size matters when it comes to dings.
Size matter.
So I know I'm going to get people in the comments if I don't point that out, saying, why didn't you cut the damage out and refill it with foam? So that's why. We're dealing with very small dings. We're not dealing with damage that has taken foam away from the board. We're just dealing with missing glass and resin and damaged glass and resin. Okay, so let's talk about air bubbles. Most people who have heard anything at all about fiberglassing have heard about air bubbles, and they've heard that they're bad. We don't want air bubbles in our fiberglass, and that is true, but there are two types of air bubbles you can get in fiberglass and resin work, and only one of them really pertains to surfboard repairs. So the first type of air bubble we're going to talk about, which doesn't really pertain to surfboard repairs, every now and then it comes up, but it's pretty rare. These type of air bubbles have more to do with industries that pour resin at depth. So if you've ever seen those resin tables people make, shout out to Blacktail Studio. If you've ever seen people making resin chopping boards or like little balls out of resin, like art you hang in your garden, all that type of crud, those air bubbles are different from the air bubbles we get in surfboards. So the type of resins that people like Blacktail Studios use to make their resin tables and all that type of stuff is different. Because they're pouring at depth, they use what's called a casting resin, which is kind of specially formulated to pour at depth. Now this is a little chess piece that I've made. That's what I do in my spare time. I hand carve chess pieces out of resin, and if we look inside of this chess piece, you can see all those little dots, and each one of those dots is an air bubble. So that is air that has been trapped in the resin as it was curing. Now this is pretty rare with something like surfboards because we never pour resin at depth with surfboards. When we're pouring resin on surfboards, it's a really thin coat, like a coat of paint. So it's not really thick enough to have air bubbles like this in our resin work on surfboards. The type of air bubbles we get in surfboard manufacturing and repairs comes from air trapped beneath our fiberglass and whatever surface we are trying to lay our fiberglass over. So let's imagine we are doing a custom surfboard for a customer and we want to glass, they're a big chess fan, so what they want is a king to be put on the deck of their board, and they want us to fiberglass the king to the board. Yeah? No. This is an extreme example that will never come up, but it's going to give us an idea of how we get these air bubbles. So when trying to glass over our chess piece, it is impossible for us to lay the cloth flat everywhere without it lifting up. and it's going to be covered in resin, and as that resin cures, there's going to be air trapped underneath the fiberglass, and this is going to result in an air bubble. This air bubble is going to be a weak point, so as soon as we sand it, or maybe the board's finished and the board gets hit by a rock or our foot or something, that air bubble in the fiberglass cloth is going to break open and expose whatever is underneath our fiberglass. So if we happen to be putting fiberglass over a foam blank and that air bubble in our cloth bursts, now the foam blank is exposed, and then water gets in and it ruins our surfboard. Now, like I said, a chest piece glassed on top of a surfboard is quite an extreme example, but here's a common example. So when installing fin boxes, you might be able to see here that on top of both this FCS and this Futures fin box, there is a higher area where the fin slot is. That will eventually be sanded away, but that's beside the point. The point is that when we lay our glass over our fin box, when we install, it is possible for air to get trapped in here because our cloth isn't laying flat, it's going across and then up over this raised lip here and then down the other side. And so that's the type of scenario where it's really easy to get air bubbles. And then when you sand the box, those air bubbles open up. Don't forget that during the release of all of these episodes, during this series, we're doing our first ever giveaway to celebrate 6,000 subscribers to the Small Kind Ding Repairs channel. We're essentially running a raffle, and the winner of the raffle will go home, or get sent, I guess, a bunch of cool shit from Shapers Collective, which is the showroom next door. The more people that enter this raffle, the bigger the prize at the end is going to be. And if enough people enter, maybe we can even split prizes across first and second, or first, second, third, something along those lines. Whether you're from outside of New Zealand or inside of New Zealand, if you're a member, a subscriber, or you just happen to have stumbled across this video, you're more than welcome to enter the raffle. There's a bunch of cool Kiwi products in Shapers Collective, and for a lot of you, it's probably going to be pretty hard to get your hands on outside of this raffle. So there's a golden opportunity here for you to get your hands on some pretty cool stuff. You'll find all the details for this competition in the pinned comment underneath this video, or any of the other episodes to this series. They'll all have that same pinned comment with all the instructions and the details you need on how to enter the raffle. So I hear, why are we talking about air bubbles? Well, the reason we're talking about air bubbles is because we're about to cloth a repair, and we need to know that we can't have air trapped beneath our cloth when we repair the board. So if we have a really close look at our ding on the tail, you'll notice that we're pretty smooth around here, but at the bottom of the ding, there's a hole here. So you can imagine if we just laid fiberglass cloth over this ding, this is going to be all good, but this area here, there's going to be air trapped beneath our cloth. We're going to have an air bubble. And then when we sand it, particularly on the very point of a tail, which is quite a sensitive place to sand, or a sensitive place for the board to be dropped and damaged, that air bubble can break, open up our repair, and we're back to square one. So we need to make this area smooth and flat so that when we glass it, air isn't able to be trapped beneath our cloth. The same thing applies to our ding on the deck. On the tail end, we have a hole here, and then of course the ding itself is just a giant crack through the fiberglass. So inside that crack is where air can get trapped. So we don't want to just glass straight over it, because we're going to have air beneath our cloth. So what we need to do is make this area smooth and flat, so that when we cloth it, we know that no air is going to be trapped beneath. Are you a person who owns a surfboard and has damaged that surfboard and are looking for ways to fix your surfboard without just going the Uncle Tony method and filling it full of some gnarly product like carbog or resin and micro balloons? Maybe you're one of the many people who have messaged me over the years with photos of your damaged surfboard asking, hey, how do I go about fixing this in the proper manner? Maybe you've already started fixing your surfboard, but you're not quite sure what to do next. You're stuck at a particular stage. Well, do I have something that may interest you? The fact that you're here watching this video tells me that you're someone who is a surfer and does want some help in fixing your own surfboard. And I've always been here to help you guys, and that's what this channel is all about. Allow me then to introduce you guys to a product that I've created to help you along that journey and make it a little bit easier. Small Kind Ding Repairs has a new clothing line. So this, of course, is a hoodie. We all know what a hoodie looks like, but this hoodie is a little bit different. On the back of this hoodie is basically my autobiography, but it is essentially a checklist of how to fix a poly surfboard. All of these stages are going to be covered and featured in this series that you're watching right now. From prep, to fill, to skim, to sand, to paint, to laminate, to resin, to sand, to resin, to wet sand, and finally to polish. Now you could simply buy this hoodie and pin it to the wall of your shed or whatever space it is you're repairing boards in and keep this as your own little personal checklist. Or of course you could wear it while you're repairing your surfboard, and at each stage you could just take the hoodie off and read the back of it and you'll know exactly where you're up to in your repair process. Oh man. What am I gonna do with this thing? I know. Being a surfer though, maybe it's too warm for a hoodie where you're at, so that's why we also have t-shirts with the same checklist on the back. Or maybe you're the type of person who likes ultra light surfboards so that you can do incredible aerial maneuvers in the water. And if you're that person, then for you, we have here the epoxy repair checklist. This one's a little bit longer, but essentially we sand, we fill, we sand, we skim, we sand, we laminate, we sand, we resin, we wet sand, we paint, we wet sand, and we polish. But Uncle Small Kind Dings, I love doing incredible aerial maneuvers in the water, but I also live in a cold area. I've got your back, mate, because here we have the hoodie version of the epoxy repair checklist. We got every base covered. Whether you live somewhere warm and you require a t-shirt, or you live somewhere cold and you require a hoodie, Small Kind Dings has all of the options you require for your local climate and whatever type of repairs it is that you're trying to do. Between this YouTube channel and these hoodies and shirts, you now have no excuses at all to be fixing your dings like an Uncle Tony. So if this series or any one of my videos in the past has been helpful for you and you'd like to support the channel and also let the world know that you're not just another Uncle Tony filling surfboards with car bog, you'll find these shirts and hoodies by going to the description of this video and following the link to the Small Kind Ding Repairs shop. Not only will you find these fine garments in that shop, but you'll also find a catalogue of other things that you most certainly need. So after you've watched this episode, feel free to go to the shop, have a peruse, and spend your money. So now that we know the size of the dings, the condition of the dings after our initial sanding, we know that we can't cloth as a first step after that sanding. We need to make those areas smooth for clothing. So we're going to pour some resin. Now our next step after pouring the resin is going to be sanding that resin. So that means we have to mix up a sanding resin. So we already know how to mix up sanding resin. We don't need much for this job. Obviously they're two very small dings. So we're going to mix up roughly 20 mil. Now we are going to do an extra step here and we're going to add a little bit of green pigment to this resin. We're not going to talk about pigment in the case of this video because all we're talking about is poly and how to use it. So after our green color has been added, which we can kind of ignore for the purposes of this video, we're going to add our wax additive. We have 20 mils of resin here, 6 drops per 10 mils. So we're going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
She said she was 12!
12 drops of wax additive. Now, if you want a general rule of thumb for your catalyst amounts, we know that our wax additive is added at an amount of 2% to the total amount of resin that we're using. So a general rule for our catalyst amount is 1%. If we're adding 1% of catalyst to our poly resin, we know it's enough, it's going to kick off in a reasonable amount of time. From there, you can go based on temperature. So maybe in 20-degree temperatures, I want to add 1%. In 15-degree temperatures, I might want to do 1.5%. You can experiment. The ratios of catalyst to resin do get easier the more resin you mix in different environments, different temperatures, and then you just kind of know based on experience how fast you work, how much time you need to do that work. You'll kind of get a gauge of how much catalyst you can use and how much you can get away with. For the purposes of this video though, we will go with 1%. So of course 1% would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 drops. If 12 drops were 2%, then 6 drops is going to be 1%. And then of course we are going to mix this concoction for 40 seconds at a minimum. Now the one thing I can't remember if I've said already, but you don't want to add too much catalyst to a resin mix that has wax additive in it, because you need to give the resin a bit of time to settle so that that wax has a chance to rise to the surface and create its barrier. If the resin kicks too quickly before that wax can float up to the surface, then you're going to end up with sticky patches to your sanding resin. So if you're putting down sanding resin and you're finding that some of it's sticky and some of it's not sticky, consider putting in less catalyst to give that wax a little more time to float up to the surface. Now, as you can see, I've made a little resin dam. Just to hold our resin into place. And then we're going to just drop our sanding resin into our resin dam. Now we can overfill it because we can always sand excess resin away, but because it's such a sensitive spot on the board to sand, we don't want to overfill it too much because we don't want to risk sanding through next to the area we're currently filling and having to do this step again. We're then going to move on to our deck side and we're going to fill this area as well. Now, as well as there being a risk when over-catalyzing your poly resin that the wax won't have enough time to rise to the surface, when we're filling up a little ding like this where there's a crack that we're trying to fill, we also don't want the resin to kick too quickly because we want to give the resin a chance to kind of drip and run into that crack. So we want to give it a bit of time to settle, find all of those areas where air will be able to sit beneath our cloth and fill them up. Now, while we're waiting for our green sanding fill to cure or to kick off so that we can sand it, I'm going to pour a final gloss coat onto this Rodney Davidson here. It's a little bit of a resto. Didn't require too much work. It's more like a lot of ding repairs on a very old board. But this is obviously going to require quite a bit more than 20 mils of resin. So let's mix up a large quantity of sanding resin, and that way we can see how we add wax additive and catalyst to a large amount of resin versus a small amount of resin. Now, I'm definitely not going to pour a large amount of resin with no respirator on, so I'll do a voiceover over this part. But to start us off, I can let you know it's currently 27 degrees in this shed, so it is quite warm. I would definitely not be laminating a board in this temperature, just because of the amount of working time that I need to laminate a board. The resin would likely kick off, even with a small amount of catalyst, before my job was finished. But to pour a gloss coat on a board, I'm pretty confident I can get it done. So we're going to pour 700 mils of poly resin. That means that 1% of 700 mils is going to be 7, and 2% of 700 mils is going to be 14. So we're going to do 14 mils of wax additive in our 700 mils of resin, and we're going to go slightly lower than 1% of catalyst, so slightly below 7 mils, just because of the temperature. So considering 1% is 7 mil, I will probably mix up 5 mil of catalyst, so we'll go 2 mil less than 1%. I wouldn't want to go too much under that. So we'll stick the mask on and we will mix up our resin. While we're mixing up this batch of resin, you guys, as I would just like to give a shout out to all of the members of the channel, to Suzuki Ton, MJ Rally, Gareth Brewer, Rick Marion, Impurata Productions, Sam Mascary, Kelly Duran, Seth Tinsley, Drone Phobia, that's Keza Mate, Dirk Peters, Rough Shape Surf Science, Logan, and our two newest members, Pascal BB and Mark Toledano. Welcome to the new guys, and thank you to the old fellas for sticking around. Although there's only 14 of us at the moment, we're sort of starting to build this cool little community of guys of all different skill sets, undertaking all different kind of projects. Of course, plenty of people fixing dings in their own boards and other people's boards as well, but also surfboard shaping. We've had shaping bay building, 3D printing, the making of jigs to install fin boxes, fin foiling, and a myriad of other little cool projects people are doing with foam, fiberglass, and resin. I'm talking to most of these guys on a daily basis, either over Instagram or on the members only Facebook page that we've got going on, and it's been really cool to get to know these guys and see the projects that they're up to and try to help one another where we can. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's some information in the description of this video and you can follow the prompts from there. So with that big resin coat taking roughly 10 minutes to complete, coming back to this board now, and our fill, our sanding resin is all hard, cured, ready to be sanded. So even with less than 1% of catalyst in a 27-degree shed, it goes off pretty quick. So of course we have over-filled this ding quite a bit, so we need to sand it back down to shape. It is worth noting though that, let's say for instance we had under-filled this ding and there was still a bit of a hole here. We cannot pour more sanding resin or any type of resin on top of this sanding resin we've just poured. It won't adhere. Before adding any kind of material to this resin, be it cloth, poly resin, epoxy resin, sanding resin, laminating resin, we need to sand this to make it all scratched and keyed up like it is here. Otherwise there just won't be good adhesion with the next material we put on top. So don't think that once this is cured and you realize that, oh, it didn't quite fill my ding the whole way, I'll just add more now. If it's cured, it needs to be sanded. Now again, once I've sanded this, hopefully going all well, our next step is going to be to add laminating resin. So because we're adding more resin after this sand, we're still sanding with 120 grit. Alrighty, so now that we have our crack and our hole filled and there's not going to be any air under our lamination, we are of course ready for lamination. So our lamination is definitely something that we want to be thinking about while we're sanding in preparation for our lamination. You may have noticed that both of our dings, while they are reasonably small, so this ding here is really only this big, we've sanded quite a large area around it. And the same goes for our small ding on the tail here. So while our ding is reasonably small, you can see we've sanded quite a large area. Now there's two reasons that we've done that. The first reason being, with the amount of sanding that we've done to the ding area, so in preparation for this filling sanding resin, and of course sanding that sanding resin, we've weakened this area around our initial ding. So we want to make sure that we're not just putting cloth over where the ding was originally, but we're going to be putting cloth over this area that we've also weakened. The second reason that we're making sure we sand quite a large area in comparison to what we are going to laminate is, so this is our patch for lamination. Now, of course, we're using a laminating resin for this patch and lamination, so this is going to be sticky once that resin's cured. We're not going to be able to sand the area, so then we're going to have to put down a sanding resin which will allow us to sand this area. So after we've laid this cloth down, we're not going to be sanding anymore. We're going to be pouring resin straight on it as soon as that laminating resin has cured. Now, when we pour that coat of sanding resin afterwards, we are of course going to have an edge of resin where we stop pouring. So if I brush resin on like this, there's going to be an edge of resin. Once that resin has cured, we're going to need to sand that resin edge. And if that edge of resin is too close to the edge of our lamination, then when we're sanding our resin edge, we're going to be accidentally sanding our lamination, and our strength is in this. We don't want to be sanding that if we don't have to be. We want to be sanding the resin, not the cloth. So a general rule of thumb is no matter how big your cloth patch is, we want to sand another inch around that cloth patch. That's going to give us an inch between the edge of our cloth and the edge of our next sanding coat. Now down this side, you might see that this is substantially less than an inch away from the edge of the cloth, but we're starting to get into the butt crack of the fishtail, and this area is kind of a pain in the ass to sand, so I'm trying to keep my resin out of this area as much as I can, just to make sanding a bit easier. If that doesn't all make sense, don't worry, it will in a minute because we're going to do it, so I'll show you exactly what I mean. The key message of this little section of video though is just to think ahead to your following stage so that you can prepare appropriately for the next stage to come. There's nothing worse than laying down your cloth as a lamination and then your next step is to pour your sanding resin, and when you go to pour it you realize, oh, I actually don't have any space to pour it because I haven't sanded far enough. I'm going to be pouring resin on top of unsanded board. Okay, so now we're up to laminating. We are of course going to be mixing laminating resin. So again, we're only going to need roughly 20 ml of resin for this job, not much at all. Now for this stage, I'm also going to be working with some green resin tint, but this video isn't in relation to resin tint. It's going to be long enough without talking about resin tints. So you can ignore all the color work in this job and just know that this resin, it's all just laminating resin at this stage. The color of it doesn't matter. It's the same resin, just different color. I'm going to add some green tint, of course, so that our resin is green. And then because we're working with a small amount of resin, but also I need a little bit of working time when it comes to laminating, just to make sure the cloth is all flat and nice and wiped out and where it should be, I'm only going to add 3 drops of catalyst. So that's mixed. We're now going to mix our green resin. Okay, so it doesn't matter, again, the green resin here, but I'm just going to lay down a little bit of green first over our dinged area. I'm then going to put our cloth in place and just push it down around the dinged area, just like that. Now I'm going to use my clear resin, but again, I can't stress enough, ignore the colors if you can. I know it might be hard, but for the purposes of this video, it just doesn't matter. Now right now with the resin, I'm just wetting the cloth out. I don't really care how it looks, I'm just making sure the cloth is entirely wet. That's why I'm using a stick. I'm just getting the resin on there. Now that the resin is on there, I can start taking a little more care and finesse using the squeegee getting the cloth exactly where I want it. And wiping off any excess resin once the cloth is in position. You can use your hands as well if you've got gloves on. Don't use your hands if you're not wearing gloves. You should definitely be wearing gloves.
Hang this off the nose because I'm trying to get as much back to shape as possible. I'm just using my finger because it's a small area. That step's finished.
And that's it. We can move on to our next one. So the goal of laminating is to get it as flat and as tight as you can. You don't want to be leaving excess resin. Imagine if we left blobs of resin around like this on our cloth and then it all cured. The area isn't flat anymore, and our goal is to get that area flat. So when we're wiping our cloth off, we're trying to get rid of all that excess resin, which is going to create significant highs and lows in our lamination. It's not so critical for a small area like this, but certainly if you're doing large dings or glassing an entire board, a brand new board, you don't want lumps of resin in your lamination. You want the area flat.
Few inches later.
Yes, I have changed shirts. I've just been for a swim while we've been waiting for this cloth to cure. So our cloth is now cured. It's sticky though, so we can't do anything with it yet. We can't sand it, so we need to apply some sanding resin over the top of both of these patches. So repeating the same steps that we've done before for sanding resin, we're going to mix up roughly 20 mil. We don't need much for this small job. Same deal, 20 mil, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 drops of our wax additive. That's going to give us our sanding resin, and we'll do 6 drops of catalyst. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oop, that was 7, so that's 1% roughly. We did 7 instead of 6. We are going to mix up for 40 seconds. I also have another board behind me which has a similar ding to these ones, so I'm going to fill it with the same sanding resin after I've applied our sanding coat onto this one. So remembering that we want to keep our resin edge as far away from our cloth edge as is possible. Alright, with our resin coat on our fishtail, we could in theory just sand this up now, polish it, the board is done, the video is done, but we're not going to do that. We're actually going to move on to another board. We're going to move on to this purple and black Flanagan, which had some similar damage to the tail of that fish, but it was up by the rails. And although they're only small little areas, I thought it would be a good opportunity to paint this before we laminate it, so we get a chance to look at the art of painting beneath poly laminations.